Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Look, I'm super excited to dig into this today because we're tackling something I know a lot of organizations struggle with constantly. We are taking the dense, frankly, pretty theoretical requirements of the ISO 14001:2026 standard and dragging them out of that dusty binder on the shelf. We're turning them into a living, breathing emission reduction action plan. We're going to see exactly how compliance is actually meant to drive real-world impact.
Okay, let's dive right in. We've got a clear commitment to action pipeline to follow today. We're going to hit four main areas. First, defining your environmental boundaries. Second, embedding the EMS into your everyday operations. Third, assigning roles and accountability. And finally, executing the action plan.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, defining your environmental boundaries. So before you can manage literally anything, your environmental architecture absolutely has to start with a rock-solid foundation. You've got to know exactly where your organization's true operational borders begin and end. And that brings us to Clause 4.3, the EMS scope. Now, you might look at this definition and think, okay, sure, it's just an administrative checklist. We just draw a circle around the main office. But actually, this is a deeply strategic activity. The scope ensures all your real environmental risks and compliance obligations are captured systematically. If your scope is poorly defined or kind of artificially narrowed down, you're going to face massive inconsistencies and some huge gaps in your regulatory compliance.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between what's acceptable and what is a massive audit red flag. A justified exclusion? Well, that might be a construction company leaving out a subcontractor's internal operations because, hey, they genuinely don't have operational control over them. But look at the unjustified exclusion. A logistics company trying to define its EMS scope as just its administrative offices, completely ignoring its transportation fleet. I mean, come on, that fleet is their primary source of greenhouse gas emissions. They plan the routes, they buy the fuel, so they absolutely have influence. Leaving them out is just an artificial trick to hide heavy pollution and dodge audit complexity. That is a major nonconformance for sure.
Moving right along to Section 2, embedding EMS into operations. So once you've honestly defined those boundaries, the next absolutely crucial step is integrating them directly into the company's operational bloodstream. This quote really hits the nail on the head regarding the core philosophy of Clause 4.4. Environmental management cannot just be some parallel framework sitting on a shelf, managed in total isolation by one overworked sustainability officer, right? It needs to be the organization's DNA. It has to influence decisions across the board. If it's not embedded into the daily workflow, it's really just a symbolic gesture. To prove that this isn't just the sustainability department's problem, check out these unexpected operational areas where an EMS actually has to live. In procurement, buyers have to evaluate supplier compliance before they even sign contracts. Over in maintenance, crews need to prevent chemical leaks and optimize equipment for energy efficiency. And in strategic planning, well, capital investments must account for carbon emission reduction targets. It is a totally integrated effort across the entire value chain. Basically, if your EMS isn't actively shaping decisions in all these departments, you're just not fully compliant with the 2026 standard.
All right, that brings us to Section 3, assigning roles and accountability.
Now that we know the system has to be embedded literally everywhere, we absolutely have to establish who is actually doing the work. Because as we all know, when something is everyone's job, it incredibly quickly becomes no one's job. Clause 5.3 demands the formal assignment of environmental responsibilities, and this RACI matrix visually grounds that whole concept. Notice how we're formally assigning active verbs to specific people, rather than just relying on vague departmental assumptions. We can clearly see who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. For example, the fleet manager might be responsible for emissions monitoring, while procurement takes on supplier evaluation. Having this level of clarity prevents duplication of effort and makes sure no critical compliance tasks just fall through the cracks.
But here's a critical question for you to chew on. You've assigned the roles, you've handed out the responsibilities. What happens when you give an employee the responsibility to manage an environmental risk, but absolutely zero authority to actually make decisions?
Well, you get authority gaps. And let me tell you, they are incredibly dangerous. According to the source material, a classic example is a maintenance team tasked with controlling equipment emissions. They know a machine needs preventative maintenance to stop a leak, but they lack the actual authority to schedule that downtime because the production manager is prioritizing daily output targets over literally everything else. So the maintenance team has the responsibility, but absolutely no power. Assigning a task without the power to execute it, that is a systemic vulnerability, and auditors are going to look for it immediately. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, executing the action plan. This is really where it all comes together. We've defined the boundaries, embedded the system, and assigned the roles with the right authority. Now we transition to the micro-level phase, where all that prep work lands on the practical execution of a tracked environmental initiative. So, the crucial point here is how Clause 6.2 demands strict answers to 4 key pillars of action planning. For any environmental objective to be considered operational, and not just some aspirational dream, you absolutely must document 4 things. 1. What needs to be achieved? 2. Who is responsible? 3. How the actions will be implemented using specific methods. And 4. When the results will be achieved, with strict timelines. Without those 4 elements locked in, your objective is just going to stagnate.
To bring those 4 pillars to life, we can look at this interactive project management Gantt chart. It vividly details exactly how a theoretical policy transforms into strict, trackable milestones. For this emission reduction initiative, the chart lays out the specific tasks, like procuring low VOC coding technology by month 3 and deploying eco-driving training for personnel by month 6. It clearly shows the responsible personnel assigned to each phase, the specific implementation methods being used, and the strict timelines leading right up to the end of the year. This is exactly the kind of structured implementation pathway that auditors want to see.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the final metric, achieving that targeted 15% reduction. This measurable metric proves the action plan isn't just some vague promise to do better in the future. It's a locked-in, operational reality. It connects the strategic intent of the whole organization all the way down to a verifiable, hard data point that management can actually review and auditors can validate. Which really brings us to the core challenge of ISO 14001:2026. Look, it's incredibly easy to draft a policy and just shove it in a binder. But as we've seen today, true compliance requires taking that policy, drawing honest boundaries, embedding it across every single department, empowering your people, and actually executing measurable action plans. So I'm going to leave you with this. Evaluate your own organization. If your environmental management system is really just a binder on a shelf, what real-world impacts are you actually hiding? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep pushing for genuine, measurable action.